This is the Dollemore Daily, and I'm Jesse Dollemore. Even to the untrained eye, Donald Trump is unfit to be president of the United States. And even apart from his inherent crass nature and lack of intellect and curiosity, he is a man more suited for incarceration than for leadership. His inability to take criticism, his refusal to admit to even minor mistakes, his fawning affection for brutal dictatorial leaders. They all make him wrong for the job. Any job, really, but especially for the job of President of the United States of America. And I'm certainly not the first to make these observations. Hell, even those who work for Donald Trump find it an almost impossible charge. This is why largely Donald Trump has had the most insane retention issues among his top-level staff of any president in the history of our country. In fact, according to data compiled by Catherine Dunn-Tenpas of the Brookings Institute, there has been a turnover rate of 80% among top staff positions. As NBC describes it, the report focuses on the top 65 positions in the executive office of the president, which includes jobs like National Security Advisor, Chief of Staff, Communications Director, Press Secretary, and Director of National Intelligence. The study found 51 of the 65 positions have turned over since Trump took office. 16 of those positions have turned over twice or more, the study found. The A-team figures do not include Trump's cabinet, where there's also been an unprecedented amount of tumult and turnover. 9 of the 15 cabinet positions that are in the presidential line of succession have turned over at least once. That number surpasses the amount of change during the entire first terms of Presidents Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama, and the one term of George H.W. Bush. You see, Trump promised to hire the best people. Well, he didn't. And not only did he not hire the best, he can't even keep the ones he did end up with, which leaves him, and by extension the country, in a very serious and sometimes very dangerous position. Especially considering the fact that Donald Trump has had 4 different national security advisors. 6, if you want to include those who were there briefly while waiting for a successor. We've also had 4 different secretaries of Homeland Security, soon to be 5 since the latest just offered up his resignation. Well, you may have heard reporting the other day that Donald Trump's former chief of staff, John Kelly, made remarks at a political conference called the Sea Island Summit hosted by the Washington Examiner. Among some of the things that were said is that he regrets leaving as the White House chief of staff and that Donald Trump wouldn't be in the impeachment predicament he currently finds himself in if he would have stayed. Reading from the Washington Examiner, John Kelly warned President Trump that hiring a quote-unquote yes man to succeed him as White House chief of staff would lead to impeachment and, in hindsight, regrets his decision to resign. Quote, "I said, whatever you do," and we were still in the process of trying to find someone to take my place, I said, "Whatever you do, don't hire a yes man, someone who won't tell you the truth. Don't do that. Because if you do, I believe you will be impeached," Kelly recalled in an interview at the Sea Island Summit, a political conference hosted by the Washington Examiner. Someone has got to be a guide that tells the president that you either have the authority or you don't, or Mr. President, don't do it, Kelly said. Don't hire someone that will just nod and say, "That's a great idea, Mr. President," because you will be impeached. Kelly added, the system that should be in place, clearly the system of advising, bringing in experts in, having these discussions with the president so he can make an informed decision, that clearly is not in place, and I feel bad that I left. All of that is remarkable. John Kelly, retired United States Marine 4-star general, former Secretary of Homeland Security, former chief of staff to the President of the United States, is saying out loud with his own mouth that Donald Trump is such a feckless mook that he needs to be babysat, and that if not watched closely, if left to his own devices, Donald Trump will get himself into trouble. Not just any trouble, though. John Kelly is admitting that the natural path for Donald Trump is impeachable offenses, and that he knew that Donald Trump's likely choice to replace him as chief of staff would be someone who he could treat like a servant. And that is exactly what he chose. That is exactly what he got. Remember that it wasn't even 2 weeks into his new role as chief of staff when Donald Trump berated Mick Mulvaney, like the servile little yes man he is, at a meeting in the White House Situation Room, which included Democratic leadership.
Boris, something that's just into CNN as well is looking at how things are being run around the Oval Office and one particular interaction between the president and his new acting chief of staff. What are you hearing?
Yeah, this is a bit of an eyebrow-raising statement the president apparently made to his new acting chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney. According to a source I just spoke with a few moments ago, they tell me that during a Situation Room meeting with congressional leadership, including Democrats and Republicans, toward the end of that meeting, Mick Mulvaney started talking about the offer that Democrats had made to reopen the federal government, that $1.3 billion figure that there was an agreement to between Republicans and Democrats until the president changed his mind. And the president, mid-sentence, cut off Mulvaney saying, quote, "Stop, stop, just stop. What are you doing? You are effing it all up, Mick." That's according to an official who was in the room for the negotiations. And according to the source, there was shockingly no reaction at all from anyone in the room. According to my source, several Democrats had also been ribbing at Mulvaney during these negotiations. So clearly a very difficult jumping off point for the new acting chief of staff to not only get it from the president, but also from Democrats, Anna.
Also, remember when Donald Trump was given an interview with ABC in the Oval Office a few months ago and acted like a childish jerk-off when someone coughed during his answer, kicking them out of the room? That was also Mick Mulvaney, his new yes man chief of staff.
They're after my financial statement, the Senate. They'd like to get my financial statement. At some point, I hope they get it.
You're going to turn it over?
No, at some point, I might. But at some point, I hope they get it because it's a fantastic financial statement. It's a fantastic financial statement. And let's do that over. He's coughing in the middle of my answer.
Yeah, okay.
I don't like that, you know?
Your chief of staff.
If you're going to cough, please leave the room.
Get a shot of, and I'll come over here.
You just can't.
Just to change the shot.
Okay.
Sorry, Mr. Trump.
Okay, do you want to do that a little differently then?
Yeah, we just changed the angle. Okay. Yep. Thank you.
So at some point, I look forward to, frankly, I'd like to have people see my financial statement.
So John Kelly's warnings were clearly not heeded, because Donald Trump ended up with the very sort of yes man that General Kelly warned him about. And John Kelly's dire predictions related to what would ultimately result from hiring that sort of yes man has also come to pass. Because here we are, only 10 or so months later, and Donald Trump is on the precipice of the sheer cliff that is his own impeachment. And if you were wondering what Donald Trump and his team had to say about John Kelly's comments, well, Donald Trump flatly denied it, saying, "John Kelly never said that. He never said anything like that. If he would have said that, I would have thrown him out of the office. He just wants to come back into the action like everybody else does." Look, I disagree fundamentally with John Kelly on a whole host of issues. I believe he ultimately did great damage to America in service to Donald Trump and his far-right, white supremacist policies. But come on, who are we going to believe? The Bone Spur baby or a steely-eyed war veteran who actually greatly sacrificed for his country? Trump would have thrown John Kelly out of the office? Give me a break. What a trite fool. And adding insult to injury, Donald Trump's new propaganda minister, Stephanie Grissom, made sure to get her obsequious sycophancy on the record by telling CNN, "I worked with John Kelly, and he was totally unequipped to handle the genius of our great president." Look, this is just gross. It is yet another example of Donald Trump and his crowd asking America to suspend reality. They want us all to believe that Trump doesn't have an inclination toward criminality. They want us to believe that Trump isn't a problem, a danger, a self-interested troll. They want us to believe that every single instance of someone calling it as it is just a bunch of sore losers trying to take him down. What's more likely? A man who has built his wealth by stepping on and abusing those around him is continuing that same lifelong pattern? Or countless people who've given sweat and literal blood honorably for their country have hurt feelings because of the genius of Trump? Come on, man.